That's my cue. Recording in progress. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Carrie Neidig with Sally Mae. I am joined today by an esteemed panel. Melanie O'Halleck, my colleague at Sally Mae, is also on the line. We're going to tag team the session, but we're very, very excited to present alongside Kat from Westchester, Shelby from Lafayette, and Joel from the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I absolutely want our panelists, please feel free to do yourself justice. I'm not reading any kind of bio for everybody. I really wanted to dig into the meat of this presentation. For those of you that joined us during spring training, we did a very similar panel. And we got into a lot of really great content. And there was some great interaction. And so I want to try to keep my comments limited and allow our panelists to really dig in. Now, before we get started, we do want to thank each of you for, if any of you saw the pre-conference survey that was put out maybe about a month ago or so, that really helped us to understand when we say financial literacy, financial wellness, what is it exactly that you want to know more about? And so thank you for those of you that responded and provided directions so that we can make sure that we're hitting some of those hot topics. I do know that there was a question within the Whova app. And so if you do have questions, we do ask you, please feel free, we'll be monitoring the chat, put in your comments, your questions directly in there. If we don't have enough time to get to everything, we will absolutely follow up. And I guess this is my time to put in a plug for the newsletter. I'm also the newsletter editor. And so we do highlight programs within the newsletter. In fact, there was an article about Lafayette, one recently about Arcadia. And so again, these conversations don't need to stop with sessions like this. So, we'll keep the conversation going in as many platforms as possible. And so let me see if I can, what we actually did was me trying to screen share and talk at the same time. What we really did was took the comments on the survey, took our learnings from spring training, and really developed essentially 3 different buckets. And we're going to, whether we stick to these specific buckets, we have a slide for each piece. Again, this may just be a conversation that flows. So the very first piece is really taking a look at the management and the creation of a program itself. And so here, by definition, financial wellness refers to the financial health of an individual, and it's a piece of that puzzle, right? That wellness wheel that you see here. And so I have a 2-part question to kick off today's session. Now, and I'll ask each of our panelists, and I guess the one thing we didn't really coordinate was what order do you want to speak in? So maybe it's whoever comes off mute fast enough, I don't know. But the question generally is, why did you create a financial wellness program? And what is the focus of that program? So we'll turn it over to whoever can unmute fast enough.
I can go first. So at Westchester, our financial wellness program was created out of necessity. Back in the day, at the time, we had a higher than average default rate. So we decided to focus on trying to curb that. And our financial literacy program initially started as just focusing on student loan repayments, student financial aid health, things of that nature. It's grown quite a bit since then, but that was the initial concept. So it was out of necessity that we felt like we needed to do an additional step aside from just doing, pushing for exit counseling and then making that mandatory for students to receive their diploma, their transcripts, things like that. At Westchester, our population of students, when we have expanded our financial literacy, we have about 35 to 40% of students who receive a federal Pell Grant. When we were looking at expanding our programming, we actually polled our students to see what type of information that they wanted out of financial literacy. What did they want to learn about? And the overwhelming majority of it was, how do I fund college? What is credit? How do I get approved for a loan? That kind of thing. So that is a huge piece of our financial literacy. And it's not necessarily mandatory to do that, but we created a student panel, our financial literacy ambassadors, who really dictate to myself and my colleague who do the financial literacy programming here on what students really want to hear about and what to learn about and what types of things that they'll want to be involved in. So that's how it all started here. To pass it off to.
I can go. So ours is a little bit different. So a little bit different from Kat's population. We have a much smaller Pell population at Lafayette College. So just in retrospect, for a $75,000 price tag, we have over 50% of our students that are full pay students. So we are really, our default rate is very low, but the way that our program got started is we had a few students actually go up to our dean of students and say, we're really interested in a program that revolves around personal finance. And just like that, within, I would say, a couple of weeks, the ball was rolling. It had been rolling in the financial aid office because we do attend the National Summit for Collegiate Financial Wellness, which I would highly recommend. It is a really great conference for those that are looking to build a program, for those that are looking to get certified in financial counseling. For instance, I have my certification in financial counseling from AFCPE, which I can gladly put in the chat too, in case anybody wants to research that program. But the ball had been rolling because I had been working on that certification. It takes a little bit to kind of graduate from the program. So I had been working on that. But once the students showed interest, that was really when it took off. And then having the buy-in from the dean's office was huge for us. Our program, I would say, is much more focused on the ready to use information at the time. So the way that we build our program is that for freshmen, we may start with the basics. So start with a foundation and then build our way up. So first understanding, what does it even mean to have financial happiness, financial stability, and then kind of how do you work up from that? So budgeting. Then maybe if we have our group of juniors or who are usually a study abroad, we'll do some financial wellness that is based around how to save for study abroad or how to protect yourself from identity theft. So our programs are really based on where the student is in their year of study. But that's where we kind of build our focus on, is that ready to use, ready to implement information. So for our seniors, we usually bring in somebody from a Fortune 500 company that does millions of interviews a year to kind of talk about salaries, benefits, how to negotiate that salary, or how to negotiate certain benefits that come with it. So our program is really focused on where the student is at that time, or we're very flexible. If we have a group that reaches out to us and says, this is what we need to know right now, then that's what we will present on for them. So that's how we got started, and then what our really basis of our program is, with what we focus on.
So I can go next. And, you know, both Katrina and Shelby shared some great pieces of how they've gotten started. And we share many of those same sentiments. I can say with our financial wellness program at Pitt, particularly, it actually predates me. I started with the University of Pittsburgh in 2020, but prior to my arrival, several areas of our campus had been practicing financial literacy. From our career services department, we had student groups practicing financial literacy. We also had our dean of student services who had made it a priority to give our students that opportunity to gain financial education. So you know how it can be on a campus where there's so many of these small pockets where things are happening in silos. And of course, within the financial aid department, it had been a goal to promote financial wellness, especially as we think about student loan repayment, and we start to think about some of the other impacts of financial decisions that students have to make. So at that time, in 2017, our several departments came together to form a financial wellness program, or financial wellness activity, I should say, under the guidance of our Dean of Student Services and our Executive Director of Financial Aid. And from there, essentially started doing activities with students, collaborating more so to really give students a well-developed and well-packaged program. Over time, they found that like operating from a task force really wasn't able to like really provide that robust program that students could really engage in. And from there, they decided to hire a financial wellness program director, which I was lucky enough to go ahead and land that position. I had been doing financial literacy prior to my arrival here. And in that time, we took the initiative to connect with students, number one, like on the task force. A student was on the task force, providing additional information as far as like, this is some of the content that students are interested in on that task force. From there, being able to provide small content pieces up until my start, which was in September 2020. And as of January 2020, we started to offer more workshops, for example, started to speak with more student groups and learning what are some of the things that they're really interested in. So like we shared, understanding financial aid, for example, taking that time to understand how do you start a budget. One thing that we've seen from our students is like some of our students are advanced and they're saying, hey, we want to know about like investing. And of course, we're seeing it, especially with the explosion of like Bitcoin and, just the high increase in understanding how do you grow money. So of course, those are some of the content pieces that we've seen. And from there, we've been partnering with organizations as well as like delivering content to really get our students engaged.
You all had some really great pieces of information in there. And I think one thing that I heard, and actually something that you said, Joel, really is going to feed us right into the next sort of, we'll call it, that kind of bucket of approaching today's session. But there was a theme certainly when you looked at creating the program. While your programs initially perhaps had different reasons for starting, and apparently my dog is agreeing with all of us right now. The overarching theme is, as you learn more about students and as you continue your programming, you're finding new ways to expand that content. And Kat, you said that too. The initial kind of, we're going to help with student loan repayment, right? We have a specific need we're trying to address, but then it grew from there. And you're all using students in different ways, and that became very clear. And so I think that was fantastic. And we can certainly, again, for those of you on the phone, please feel free to throw some comments into the chat as well. And kind of feeding in something that Joel just said, and actually I think all three of you may have mentioned an office within your comments. Right, Shelby talked about Dean of Students, actually it was Dean of Student Services at Pitt, right, too, as well, Joel, and financial aid and all these different career services, somebody said, right? So you have all these different offices. So when you look to create a program, when you were obtaining that buy-in, I think that's where I know I hear a lot from, it's difficult to get it going. I'm just one person in financial aid. How do you have any advice or any thoughts surrounding how to obtain kind of an across campus buy-in to help with all of the things, and really who were your allies on campus when you were doing that? And again, I don't know if we want to stick to the same order. I'm leaving that up to you guys, but really, like advice for how to get the buy-in, and then what offices are you really leveraging to help you get the word out?
I can start off. So prior to joining Pitt, I had the opportunity to launch two financial wellness programs at 2 community colleges in Texas. And one of the lessons that I learned here, I came to a task force that was ready to go and essentially was saying, hey, like, let's take off together. Of course, with my experience at Houston Community College and College of the Mainland, the experience was I was the one who was coming in and really like taking everyone and engaging them to really get the program off the ground. And some of the departments that I found that were really helpful is, number one, if you have a first year seminar course, for example, and they're using financial wellness or financial literacy content, great place to start. Most of the time you'll find that those professors are really saying, I want someone else to essentially deliver this content. Like I'm happy to share skills of how can students really succeed, but this isn't a strong suit for me. So being able to find faculty members along those lines, also taking, for instance, in your student services or your student affairs, starting to think about some of those student government board associations, some of those administrators who are looking for content on a regular basis. I know I have participated with like honor societies where they've asked me to come out. Sometimes it's working with your admissions department or your scholarship department and really being able to say, can we start some type of initiative where a student can receive a scholarship if you're looking for some of these opportunities. So really being able to like pinpoint who's practicing financial literacy in some ways, but also being willing to like go out and find some of those student groups.
I completely agree with Joel. I mean, it was started initially at Westchester completely through the financial aid office simply because of how we started. But when we wanted to start expanding, and when I say we, I don't mean me, because I didn't start at Westchester until a year ago. So what we did was we reached out to our first year experience department, and because they do a lot of the financial literacy programming in terms of like, you know, what is credit and things like that, and kind of try to develop some of the programs with them. We also have the state employees credit union on campus, and we partnered with them in terms of developing programming. And actually, one of the sessions that we had here at PASFAA, I actually wrote down because I was in it. Tammy from
Inceptia.
Yeah, from Inceptia. Yeah, so she had talked about food inequality and, you know, having targeting programming toward women and people of color, and to reach out to the DEI office, Department of Equity and Inclusion. And that's not something that we've done at Westchester yet, but that's something I'm definitely literally going to do probably tomorrow, is reach out to our ODI office and see if they want to partner with some programming for us. So a lot of that is to just kind of, I mean, when I first started, I just sent emails based off of the website and was like, hey, so I'm new. And, you know, this is kind of what I'm envisioning. Is this something that you would be interested in, or do you need help with anything? Trying to just, you know, meet people and network that way.
Yes, so I'll add just a few additional points. Obviously, our biggest partner in this was probably the dean's office. But something that I like to remember is the reason the dean's office became a partner was because of the students that pushed for something like this. So if you have students that are reaching out to career services for something that they don't offer, you know, or you can partner with your career services office. Where I find we get a lot of those partners is kind of reaching out to the student groups that are associated with that program. So for instance, Kat was just talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. We will reach out to some of our targeted groups on campus and offer them those specific resources through our financial wellness program. And then it kind of once they see their students are like wanting these things and really feeding off of them, they really are wanting to be a partner. So Lafayette has PASFAA programs, and that was the last group that we actually just presented to, but we reached out to the PASFAA mentors and we're like, we offer this, would any of your PASFAA groups be really interested? And they loved it. They feed off of that, and then it kind of just feeds into the community. So for us, the dean's office was really key. Our fraternities and sororities, huge on campus for buy-in for this program, and then kind of pushing it out, because the best word of mouth is the word of mouth through the student, as long as it's good word of mouth. And then also study abroad was a big draw in for us, as well as we talked about career services. The program that we use also allows alumni to maintain their access to our online resources, as well as there are some resources that if you're looking to get into a program that offer students that are coming in, so prospective students, to also have access. So it could be an enrollment tool as well. I will say we don't use it really as strongly for enrollment tool at Lafayette as we do for a tool to offer while they're here. So that's just something I mentioned. One thing I do want to say here just really quickly is you don't need a large budget to start. I started with, I would think maybe $1,000, and that was to create a logo so that we could have some branding. But at this point, I don't, maybe on an expensive year, I spend $500 on a program. Okay, so it's not that you can't start it because there's an exorbitant budget that's associated with it. Can you build it into that? Probably, but it's not that you can't start a program without minimum budgetary assignments to yourself. So just know that when we started, that's where I thought we were going to need a lot of additional buy-in, was so that we could split the cost of a lot of things. But I have found over time that there are a lot of resources available that come at a very reasonable cost.
Thank you. I'm going to, I believe, and we did touch on a little bit of this, but I'm actually going to turn Melanie. And my screen is very strange, so I'm not sure if you are.
Yes,
Your
yep,
face.
I'm here. Okay.
Oh,
thanks.
now I
Okay.
see you.
All righty. Yeah, like we talked before, the idea that one conversation and one topic is going to blend right into the other. So it is a really good flow into this next slide. And just real quick, Carrie, if you would, pop to the slide that comes after this. The next thing is the idea of what's next, the realities of a post-pandemic world. And going back to the previous slide, I just wanted to share that one because I think as, you know, as Joel and Shelby and folks share with us kind of what that content looks like. And Kara, if you want to go ahead and move that back a slide for us.
Now you're really asking me to do a lot. See, I knew it wasn't going to work, guys. Now I don't know how to go backwards. I'll work on that. There we go.
There we go. She got it. Yeah, all of you guys have mentioned kind of the high level, the idea of, like, you know, talking to student groups and, you know, the dean of student services and what was already existing. And I think at this point, maybe if we can go a little bit deeper in those conversations and share with folks, like, you know, what did more of the specifics look like? You know, the idea was it in person or virtual, and, you know, do you use student ambassadors? And again, that slide that I won't ask Carrie to flip to again, but is that changing? You know, how do you come up with the ideas for the content, whether it is a presentation, whether it is a website? You've got the overarching idea, but then how do you bring together the content? We want to talk about that. And I know Shelby talked specifically about, you know, getting that certification as a planner, which being that helps you pull that content in. So if you guys can talk a little bit more about, you know, actually putting it together and where that content comes from. And again, I think, you know, if it's going to be completely different post-pandemic, then I think if it's easier enough just to share that right now while you're talking, please feel free to do that. And then we can kind of either save defining success until after you've walked through it. But if you want, if that ties in while you're talking, feel free to keep talking and talk about how you define success as well. Thanks, guys.
I can start a little bit with this one, and I'll keep it very brief. So I won't say we've moved as much to virtual as we're still in person now that the students are back, especially. We are primarily in person for our presentations. Virtually, we'll do things, you know, if a student wants that. So my thing, especially with building the content, is meeting the student where they are. So I try to be as flexible for students as possible. So if that's in person or virtual, then their group gets to decide if that's in person or virtual. With a survey, they usually send a survey out to the group and they work on the date. I usually allow them to select the time within reason because I know it's probably going to be 7 o'clock. That's usually when I find that our students want to meet or when clubs are meeting. So I'm not meeting with them at 9 p.m., but I can definitely make 7 o'clock work. So allowing them to select the time. And then also what I do, and this is on our Lafayette page, if anybody kind of wants to go in it, is I usually give them an outline. Here are topics that we can talk about. You pick what you're interested in, and I will make that work for you. So that's probably pulling some information from one PowerPoint, some information from another PowerPoint, or maybe it's something that's already been created and then it's a little bit easier. But I try to always be as flexible and meet the student for what they're interested in, because I find that is where I get the most success and the most engagement. We currently don't use student ambassadors. I will tell you, I'm a party of one right now when it comes to the presentations, minus bringing in experts from fields that I'm uncomfortable speaking with. So while I have my certification in financial planning, or I should say financial counseling, I'm not a planner. So I'm not going to tell somebody to go invest in Google or Apple. Like, I'm not going to tell you how to invest your money, but I will find you somebody who is a certified financial planner that can walk you through those things. And defining success is very, for me, if you have one student, that's one more student than you helped the day before. So my defining of success is if somebody takes something away from what we're providing, that is how I define my success. It doesn't mean that I have to reach 300 students. If I can reach at least one, that for me is a successful experience, because at least then that one student has gathered something from what we are preparing for them. So I will leave it at that, just so that I can let Kat and Joel also share their experiences.
Great, thanks, Shelby. And I apologize if I said financial planner instead of financial counselor. Thanks.
Oh no, I think I said it first. So I'm just correcting everybody. I'm a certified financial counselor.
I can go next. At least here at Pitt, can't lie to you, I started in the midst of the pandemic. So everything to this point has been virtual. But I've been really encouraged by that, because even in speaking with some of our departments, we've seen students participate in our virtual sessions. One thing that I do believe is here to stay is that we're constantly going to be in this mix of the two, between both virtual and in person. One of the advantages of virtual, of course, is students now have the opportunity to engage in financial wellness content from their dorms, from their homes, from their rooms, which only helps us in bringing content to them. So I'm excited about that. But also on campus, I have heard from students like, I'm ready to be in a full-blown session, to be engaging with friends as we talk about this content. And of course, as we develop content, a lot of times we're trying to engage students in different ways. So whether that's like doing a game of life and they're going from booth to booth, it is a little bit harder to do that virtually compared to like doing that in person. So I do think it's a transition somewhat, that we're constantly going to be in between the two. And I'm excited about that, because there's some fun things that we could do virtually, but there's also things that we could do in person. That it may be a financial game night, for example, and now they're playing like a Monopoly or something along those lines, where they're playing forget the name right now. I think is it a Family Feud style game, where it's like more like they'll be in person. So as we're thinking about that, definitely tapping students to get some of that content. As we've started here, one of our goals was to have a student advisory board. And with that student advisory board, that's where we go to ask, what what's some content that you believe that we should be delivering to students? You know, what swag are students looking into? And getting some of those content pieces, as well as participating in AFCPE or the, like Shelby shared, you know, being with their accredited financial counselors, professional, I think, AFCPE, I think it's professional education, getting the chance to hear content from there. As far as HEFWA, great way for you to go ahead and network and hearing some of the things that our colleagues are doing. And HEFWA stands for the Higher Education Financial Wellness Alliance, which was posted in the chat already. Another resource that I would suggest is like, you know, Next Gen Personal Finance, just in case you're not capable of going to a training yet, but you want to see some content that's out there that's being used with high school teachers and is a free resource, could be a great way of like learning some more content. Last piece, because I could talk all day, is in defining success. I do think that happens in phases, right? Right now, the chief way that I would like define success of our program is that students know who we are. Shelby touched on this as far as like building a brand. So one of my big goals for this year is like, I want students to know that if I have a financial question, I'm going to the financial wellness program. And then you can move it in other phases where you start to look at knowledge gain, where you're looking at participation. But I do think you just take it in phases, and as you build your strategic plan, you kind of like go from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joel. I really, especially I like the idea of those phases. And I know Kelly's going to share a little bit now too, but we may have an opportunity to come back to hear about, and maybe some input from folks in the audience or on the session, kind of where you guys are as far as phases and what future phases are we looking at? Like what's the ultimate where we'd all like to eventually end up? So thanks.
Well, that segues into excellently, because I was just going to talk about the different phases that we went through. So at Westchester, we do have student ambassadors. We have about 15 of them. They are paid through federal work study funds, and that comes out of the financial aid office budget. And our student ambassadors are integral to our financial literacy programming. So prior to the pandemic, it was 100% everything was in person. There was nothing really virtual. And then, you know, the pandemic happened and then everything was virtual. And then students got really like zoomed out, and our attendance for things kind of like plummeted. And actually, Joel had mentioned that students had come to him and said, you know, wanted to learn about investing. One of the things, because I have a group chat with our student ambassadors, and when GameStop, their stocks went up and everyone was yelling to the moon, that got a huge amount of interest from our students. For like, what does this mean? So then that was an opportunity for our office to then say, here's some information about investing in stocks, and like, here's what, you know, is what is happening, and like, here's some articles that you can read and things like that. And we got that information from our professors that we'd reached out to. So that was a great opportunity for us to kind of keep in the know. So having student ambassadors, I think, is a huge piece. We actually just started a TikTok account and a Discord as well, because that's where students are on. They're not really on Facebook. They're not really on Instagram anymore. So it's mostly through TikTok and Discord. And we even now, because I'm a huge book nerd, we have a financial literacy book club, and that's virtual. And so the book that we just read and discussed was You Are a Badass at Making Money by Jen Cisnero. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it is both insightful and hilarious. The students really loved it. It definitely generated a lot of talk in the Discord. So in terms of like defining success, so when we have like social media and things like that in our posts, we can actually like track to see how many views we had, how much engagement. So that's something I can then bring to my supervisor and say, hey, this is what's working and this is what isn't. That's kind of like a tangible piece with our programming, not just in terms of the number of students who are attending our in-person sessions, because we have worked with, as I mentioned, our first year experience office and had speakers come in. So we've worked with them. You know, we had Tiffany Aliche come in because she wrote a book on get good with money, and she has come in and done some programming. So we've kind of co-hosted that. So in terms of, I think you need a mix of both in person and virtual, not necessarily like a Zoom, information session like this, but virtual to me means I'm thinking social media to really engage the students. So, and that's also a tangible way to define your success, not just, absolutely the anecdotal stories are super important, but also if you're looking at, you want the funding, because we can then bring that to our supervisors and say, hey, so we need some additional funds so that we can fund more programming.
I just wanted to mention one thing, and this has been really fantastic. And Kat, I think when you said about social media, and the idea of maintaining in person and, like hybrid, I think, Joy, you even said the hybrid, right? The one question that I had, and kind of going along with this, and there is a question in the chat that I think ties in nicely. What other ways would you suggest, or do you provide? So it's great to have an information session, whether it's a game or it's, I love the book club thing. I actually wrote that down. I think that's fantastic. What other resources are you presenting information on websites? Are you sharing newsletters? Are there any other avenues outside of perhaps speaking events, even if they're engaging, conversational, not necessarily always a PowerPoint, but so I guess that's the first part. But Evelyn at DeSales had asked also if there, examples of how you reach commuters or non-traditional students that might not be involved with on-campus activities, or they're balancing work life. So I guess maybe other ways to reach students, if you have any ideas there. Or,
I mean, for me personally, I think social media is the biggest influence, because it's kind of like a little snippet, especially with TikTok. You can make like a 30-second little video, and our student ambassadors are the ones who really make the videos. And you can, if you have a student ambassador do it, they can just record the video and then save it before posting it, and it's a draft. I could talk forever about, like, if you want to create social media for your financial aid office or financial literacy department, feel free to reach out to me, because I will wax poetically forever about it. But I think that's the biggest piece for me, because you reach a lot more students, and you reach even more students who aren't even current students. So I think one of our videos went a little viral, and by viral, by my standards, I mean like 2,000 people saw it. And I was so excited I was going to fall down, because nothing on my personal account has ever received that much. But I was so excited, and I was so proud of our student ambassadors who were looking at the trends for the day and decided to do, a little video on we have a scholarship of the day, and we had so many students apply for that, and I thought that was great.
And Kat, and I apologize, when you mentioned social media and in reaching, I think that's fantastic. Students that are not on campus, right? Like commuters. Mm-hmm. You have the non-traditional populations, right? Which could be, let's think grad students or continuing education, second bachelor's, whatever it might be. If I'm coming back to campus, I don't have a TikTok account, although I was just asked to do a TikTok financial literacy event. So I think I have to create one. But do you use any, I know you mentioned, because, your traditional age students aren't necessarily, or somebody mentioned Facebook, right? Are you using any other social media platforms?
Oh, yeah. We have Facebook, we have Instagram. We have, like, Facebook is the biggest one because most of our parents are on there and things like that. I mean, it's still a very popular social media site. I'm thinking more in terms of like our traditional freshman students and things like that. But certainly our grad students, our non-traditional students, non-traditional age students are on Facebook and things like that. So that's more, so our content for the different social media is vastly different. So what I'm posting on Facebook is not something that I'm posting on TikTok. Necessarily, like, it might be the same information, but how I'm delivering it is completely different, because the social media itself, the platform, is completely different. So you want to be able to have that flexibility to look at, okay, well, what is the best way to essentially market this information and where I'm marketing it to.
Kat, that's great. Joel, I know that you mentioned before you came into Pennsylvania to work at the University of Pittsburgh, you'd worked at 2 of the community colleges in Texas. And I think that probably has some of those folks who are returning to campus. They're not traditional, and they do have those busy work-life schedules. That's why they're at a community college oftentimes to begin with. So anything you could share about your experiences there, I think would be great for all folks dealing with students who might not be on campus. Thanks.
Sure. So one thing that I cannot state enough is getting into the classroom. Especially when you think about commuters, you think about non-traditional students, that time crunch is constantly on the go. So as you're building your collaborations, being able to get into some classrooms, and it doesn't have to be necessarily just the first year seminar course, for example. So I've worked with our remedial English courses to say, hey, like, how about we talk about students applying for scholarships and that being a part of their financial literacy. So coming up with some of those ideas of saying, all right, like, what is the end with these professors who have a little bit of time, but we can add a financial literacy component and sell, like, you being able to take out less loans by you know, taking on more scholarships. Continuing in that same vein, commuters a lot of times, although there may be that time crunch, they're thinking, what is of value to me? So sometimes having incentives within like workshops, so it may be something as simple as having food at the event, you know, having pizza, having something that they can eat while they're going from one place to the next, and they're a little bit more willing to take that time and say, you know what, let me check out this session. They have some food. Now that I'm hearing it, now I'm a little bit more engaged and I do want to receive more information. So making sure that you're having those opportunities to provide a few incentives. If you're thinking modules, for example, maybe you have modules and you're adding little incentive pieces behind that, where it may be a scholarship piece, or maybe there's a another incentive like AirPods, or it could be something as simple as, oh, a sweatshirt. So using some of those incentive pieces and really driving students to a website, kind of like Kat said, maybe you're driving them to the social media and you're just telling them, hey, we just want you to follow us and we're going to do a drawing for you to go ahead and like get on our social media pages so that we could deliver this content to you. So thinking outside of the box, and then sometimes even thinking inside of the box, like setting up a tabling event and just having that table and having that opportunity to show students like this is available to you. And sometimes as you look thinking of a non-traditional student, they'll say, well, I didn't know this was here, but I don't really have time to engage. That's one of your opportunities to maybe sell, having like one-on-one financial counseling where like I could set up the time with you and we could work personally, so that if you're trying to understand student loan repayment, or if there's another topic such as a scholarship, or maybe you are trying to build a budget and transition between working and handling the expenses that you're going through, that's some of those ways that you could like reach out to that non-traditional population and really meet them where they are.
Yeah, I think that's the second time we heard that. It might have been Shelby who said, I know Kat referenced it too, but the idea of meeting them where they are. So, 3:43, and as Carrie moves us to the final slide, I guess we're getting close to the point in time.
I'm not rushing you. I just didn't want to, I want to make sure that we have enough time if anybody does want to jot down any of this information that you have it, but keep going, keep going.
Okay, great. One thing I would be curious is, you know, we oftentimes we learn from our successes, from our failures. And I'd be curious as to whether or not any of you guys have thoughts on, you know, what are some things that you tried that you would never want to try again, and maybe the behind the why you felt that it didn't work. And I guess even more importantly, a way that maybe you would do it differently the next time that might make it more successful. So I don't know if you guys have any of those, because I know I always focus on all the great things and the good things you guys are doing, but just curious as to whether or not something great came from something that maybe wasn't quite so great to begin with. Thanks.
I guess something that didn't work that led to change, because right when you're building a program like this, one of the biggest things that you want to show as you progress is the success your program is having, right? So when we started our program, we were probably too broad in the overall communication that we had with certain groups. So we would say, okay, let's do a whole workshop for the whole first year class. And that we may have gotten a handful of students to participate. However, when we broke it out a little bit more and targeted certain groups within the first year class, and then did like a whole big mass like email to say, hey, we're offering this, we found that we may have gone from 3 students when you just did a mass email to the whole, and probably everybody has this, where it's like the class of 2026 at lafayette.edu, and it goes out to the whole class. If we targeted groups, then 30, 40, 50 students started showing up. So we've learned that it was better to target groups. And in that smaller communication world, at least at our institution, than to just send out one big broad email. You know, if you're doing a posting and the RAs are posting it on their walls, remember there's probably 50 other signs that are also hanging on, you know, billboards and walls. So I found that more success came from the failure of doing a mass mailing versus doing something where it was very individualized for specific groups, and then opening it up to the bigger group as well.
Great. Yeah, that might explain then why, you know, like before exit interviews were required. You know, when things were very broad, you would just have a handful, or if you just, you know, you address the whole first year class or all pre-professional students. And that's a very good thought to have shared, because it's kind of the opposite of what you might expect. So thanks, Shelby. Do we have any more questions from our folks in the audience? I always say audience. Folks at home, do you have anything you'd like to ask or add?
Are there any other, I'm going to just jump on our Whova app while those questions roll in, and it's okay if you don't have questions. It means we did a great job, and you can see, of course, we're all available, certainly. Within the app, I just want to make sure we covered, there was a question with regards to how to educate students on financial responsibilities after they complete a program. And I guess that would be more specific if your program was like I don't know if a program has a start to finish necessarily. But do you have any thoughts about, I guess, perhaps maybe continued education after maybe an event, if you do a budgeting event? How do you keep them engaged, I guess, would be another way to look at that.
So we do that through like the book club. So each month is a different topic within the book club, and it's not necessarily all like finance and how to's. Some of them are funny, like the one I mentioned, like you're a badass at making money. You know, so we keep that conversation going on our different platforms, and even in some of our events, like we promote it through there. So each month it kind of like dictates what piece and financial literacy we're kind of you know, talking about and really trying to push, which also determines like the time of the year. Like right now we're in the heat of pushing do your FAFSA. So like October's book is on scholarships, and you know how to apply for those and make the biggest bang for your buck. And it's only like 50 pages. So things like that, that's what, you know, we do.
I know one thing I've been more intent on is if a student has attended a previous session, making sure that we follow up with them. Sometimes we could send a generic, hey, this is happening, you know, email or text, but even changing up that language, like, hey, it was so great to see you at our budgeting session. Well, this next session is going to be on credit, and this is how it connects. So giving them a more tailored session and showing them that, you know, I noticed that you took the time to come to us, and we value that you gave us your time. And so because of that, now we're inviting you again to share time with us. So messaging, and I'll tell you, more so over this past 6 months, I've really understood the importance of that with our messaging, because we're currently going through a branding process. So now I see more of the importance of having some of those like follow-up messages to keep them engaged. And then you get to kind of see them evolve with their financial responsibility.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was curious as to whether or not, because we had several other questions about assessment. Now, officially, I think we're actually finished. But since we're talking about that follow-up part of it, feedback from, and we did have quite a few of those things when we did the survey, gathering feedback from your participants. Have you found that you've been able to successfully do that? And kind of where does that put you, and what are some best ways to maybe gather that type of input?
I mean, when we send out emails after every like in-person event, especially if you have a speaker, you know, if you do the survey, then they get a chance to win a gift card kind of thing. So those little incentives definitely work. I think Joel mentioned it, like, you know, give them a reason to do it.
Okay. Yep. Okay, great. Okay, well, like I think all of you guys said, we could keep talking about this forever, but I think I do want to acknowledge there was a question about, does anyone use a vendor product to promote their program? So basically a third party. And I know that probably some of the business partners who are here today may have some resources that are available to assist folks. So a plug for visiting the vendor area, you know, the exhibit area, and talking with your business partners, because there are folks who have those things available to you. And we provided the information, you see it on the screen, as far as the contact information for all of us. You know, if you want to reach out specifically to one of the folks at a school and make that inquiry, please feel free to do that as well. These guys are more than welcome and willing to, you know, talk with you and kind of share what specifically they've been able to find value in. So we just want to thank everybody. I guess we can probably officially turn off the recording at this point. And if anybody wants to stick around and chat, we could do that. I know at some point they may pull us all back out, but I want to thank all of you for attending. Thank, you know, Kat and Shelby and Joel for agreeing to kind of go through this and sit down and share their experiences. I think it's a great continuation from the session that you guys had started at the spring training, and maybe we can do part 3. Whoever chairs the next spring training can reach out to you guys. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget to do your surveys. There will be a session survey to be sure that you respond to that for the feedback for conference planning.